And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. Yes, I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour. It's great to be with you, folks, as we endeavor to learn how to explain and defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And we go wall-to-wall apologetics here. Talking about salvation, Bible, Mary, last things, philosophy, existence of God. This whole week we've covered an enormous amount of territory. And, we're going to switch things up again because in order to be an effective defender of the faith, you need to have the tools to be able to explain and defend the faith. There's so much great material that has been written. Not just coming off the press right now, and actually I think there is a kind of renaissance going on on the Catholic press with some great material for apologetics. But there's lots of classics. There are brilliant men and women who have lived before us, who have written fantastic works on apologetics, and unfortunately they're sitting at the library collecting dust. And so to help remedy this situation and uncover some of the gold nuggets that you may have missed, we're going to have Karl Keating coming on the show. We're going to continue our series where we're going to look at Catholic apologetic classics. And today's classic, I would say probably 99% of apologists out there may never heard of this individual. It is E.I. Watkins. And specifically, we're going to look at his book, Some Thoughts on Catholic Apologetics. He's also written some other apologetic works. He wrote in the sometime around 1915. So he's beginning of the last century. And there are a lot of very good resources. For some reason, that's kind of a sweet spot, I've noticed, in older classical apologetic works. Works written between 1895 and probably tapers off right about the beginning of World War II. Some great stuff written, and like I said, unfortunately, a lot of that are on bookshelves and libraries collecting dust. But never fear, we will tell you about these books and how to get a hold of them. In fact, today's book is available for free on archive.org. So just look up E.I. Watkins, W-A-T-K-I-N, Some Thoughts on Catholic Apologetics, and you can actually follow along with Karl and myself. And Karl's going to explain who this person is, what he wrote, and why it is important. That's all going to be coming up on the other side of the break. On this side of the break, as always, we have our Finding the Fallacy. Today's Finding the Fallacy is the appeal to fear. And also we meet an early church father. Today's early church father is St. Fulgentius of Ruspe. St. Fulgentius sometimes, or it's Fulgentius of Ruspe. So great stuff in store for us today. And why don't we begin with our shout-outs, our welcomes, our yoo-hoos, our salutes to those watching on Facebook, YouTube, all the live stream platforms that we are rolling out. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Yeah, thank you for the emojis. Appreciate it. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening around the United States on radio. It's great to have you on board as well. And also those listening, perhaps even in the future, our future listeners, via podcast. All the programs here on Virgin Most Powerful Radio are archived and available in podcast form on pretty much every platform that is a distributor of podcasts. It's also there on YouTube. You can see the video. And, and you can access it, through our website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org, virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And that's all one word. And just go up to our shows, scroll down to Hands-On Apologetics or any other great shows, And you have access to all our programs, and you could share them, tell people about them, download them, listen to them again. Maybe you won't be able to listen to the entire program. You might miss something that Karl's going to say, and you want to hear it. Well, that's how you do it. You just either go to the website, or you could check it out on YouTube. You could do all sorts of great stuff. And you could do Apologetics in place, because that's what we do. Many of us are restricted in travel, although it seems like it's starting to become more and more loose. But you can always do evangelism. You can always do apologetics by sharing good stuff. And, who knows? Read this book. If it speaks to you, maybe you can share it with people that you think would be interested in. So it's up to you to promote and make Jesus better known and loved. And that's why we get up in the morning every day here, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, to make Jesus better known and loved. Let's go to our Finding the Fallacy today. The Finding the Fallacy is the appeal to fear. An appeal to fear is a fallacy in which a person attempts to create support for an idea by attempting to increase the fear towards an alternative. In other words, they make the alternative to your proposal appear to be the boogeyman, something dark and scary, and hoping that that added fear would make your position more plausible. And, of course, with all informal fallacies, what they want to do is switch from evidence and arguments to some other consideration, usually emotional consideration. This happens a lot. You should always be aware of it. It's also tied in, I think, with ad hominem fallacy, things like that, where basically you're attacking your opponent's position, trying to instill emotion that, boy, this is a scary alternative, and therefore this other position must be more true, more palatable, more acceptable. We get bombarded by this a lot, and the only way you can diffuse this fallacy is to call it. Just say, stop name calling. It doesn't matter if the alternative may be a little scary, but that doesn't mean it's false, nor does it mean that it's not good, right? Everything's scary, especially virtuous things are scary. It requires us to change our lifestyle. It may require sacrifice. It might require doing without, but that doesn't mean that because there may be some sort of sacrifice involved, that it's necessarily right or wrong. That depends on the argument and the evidence. And that is our Finding the Fallacy for today, which is the appeal to fear. Let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father. Today's early church father is St. Fulgentius of Ruspe. He was born in 467 A.D., was the son of a wealthy and influential family, and was well educated in both Latin and Greek, and at one time a tax collector in his native town in a province in Africa, Byzania. He afterwards became a monk. In about the year 502, he was made the Bishop of Ruspe. A year later, the Arian Vandal persecution broke out, and he was exiled with more than 60 other Catholic bishops to Sardinia, with the exception of a 2-year period when he was in Carthage. Sometime between 510 and 517, he remained in Sardinia until the death of Trasimond, the Vandal king, in 523. Fulgentius was then able to return to Ruspe, and where he remained until his death on January 1st, 527 A.D. Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers says that Fulgentius is properly regarded as one of the greatest theologians of his age. In his doctrine on grace, he is one with Augustine. He teaches that particular saving will of God and unconditional predestination to beatitude or damnation. Unbaptized infants are excluded from beatitude, and the original sin is transmitted because of the concupiscence of the parents. This latter view very likely led him to the denial of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Yet it must be admitted that this alleged failing is not nearly so clear in his writings as some may make it. And in any case, the Immaculate Conception which seems to be both hinted at and hinted against in Augustine's writings, is a point of doctrine which had not been formally raised and to which as yet very little thought had been given. In other words, that these are usually incidental comments and they're not necessarily taking up the doctrine per se. Now, if you're going to be appealing to Fulgentius' writings, realize that his writings come to us in the form of letters that were written sometime after AD 512 and sometime before AD 527. The corpus of St. Fulgentius' letters consists of only 19 items, last fragmentary, and these are 19 include 5 addressed to him. So we have 5 letters that are addressed to Fulgentius, and the rest are letters that he wrote to others. And a very influential saint, certainly in terms of hammering out certain aspects of the grace of God in regards to Pelagianism, semi-Pelagianism, things like that. If memory serves me correctly, I believe the Second Council of Orange. That's one of those councils I think every Catholic apologist ought to be very well aware of. I believe the Second Council of Orange actually quotes from Fulgentius. So, he is certainly an important father. Although he is a bit late, like I said, he lived in the 5th century. So, but nevertheless, he is within the period of patristic writings, and therefore, very important witness to the ancient faith. Coming up next, we're going to be chatting with Karl Keating about a Catholic apologetic classic work of E.I. Watkins. Stay tuned, folks. More to come after the break.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy?
Or will it be a girl? We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president?
Or maybe a doctor. Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And we are going to be continuing our series on Looking at Catholic apologetic classics, there's so many great works that have been written in the past and, like I said, unfortunately are collecting dust on library shelves. And they really shouldn't, because these are gems that we can still use and learn from and help inform us so that we can defend the faith with confidence and clarity and charity. And as always, we're walking through many of these classics with Karl Keating. Karl Keating, of course, is the founder of Catholic Answers, and nowadays he's a full-time author. He's so far has 16 books that have been published. His classic works, of course, are Catholicism, Fundamentalism, Debating Catholicism series, Book for Life, No Apology. He's also written on other genres as well, such as outdoors, self-publishing, and fiction, and so on. You should, if you haven't bought any of Karl's books, I suggest you buy them all because they're all fantastic. So, Karl Keating, welcome back to Hands on Apologetics.
Gary, it's good to be with you again. Here is our first get-together of the new year.
Yes, yeah, Happy New Year.
But the first time we could talk, so Happy New Year, even though the month is almost over.
That's right. So what have you been up to? I know that you're a busy guy, writing, hiking, doing stuff. What have you been doing with yourself over the holiday?
Well, I haven't been doing much writing because I've been trying to get myself into shape to do a lot of hiking this year. Last year I went on a number of backpacking trips, not one of which was successful according to what my plan had been. Mm-hmm. And I decided, well, I need to be in better shape if I'm to accomplish something. And, the older you get, the longer it takes to get in shape.
Yeah.
So I've been diligently working out mainly by long hikes and mountain climbing and mountain biking. So I hope that by the time my first backpacking trip shows up in a few months, it and its followers will end up being such that they'll meet my level of satisfaction.
Good. Yeah, you got to build up for those. Any specific trips planned?
Well, I've got a couple in the Sierra Nevada, and just today I'm going to be planning one in some of the southern Utah national parks. So I'm hoping to get in about a dozen backpacking trips this year. Nice.
Yeah, great. That's a great goal. And, man, those are good workouts, too. I'm sure you're in much better shape than I am when it comes to stuff like that.
Well, what I am sure of is that I have more chance to get outside and work out this way because we don't have that white stuff on the ground.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That does hamper things when, snow and ice and such. But on the other hand, though, it's a lot easier for me to stay inside and read books where you have to fight the beautiful weather you have.
That's right. And we're talking about a book that probably almost none of our listeners has ever heard of.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So this one,
go ahead.
This one is an interesting thing because it's not by somebody who was in any way a full-time apologist. But his very first book was on apologetics. Huh. So shall I pop the name out so we can get started?
Yeah, let's do it, because I'm pretty sure no one will recognize it.
Yeah. Well, the name of the British writer is Edward Ingram Watkins, but he almost always goes by E.I. And his best-known book came out in 1939. Or I should say that he was born in 1888, which is a very good year for apologists, actually, because both Monsignor Ronald Knox and Sir Arnold Lunn were born in 1888.
Yeah.
So this makes at least 3 apologists who came out of that sterling year.
Yes.
And Watkins, so born in 1888, lived a long life, and he died in 1981. So he was around for quite a while, but never became really known. He wrote about more than a dozen books. And his best-known one is The Catholic Center, 1939. The thesis of that was that the Catholic Church, Catholic religion, is the center intellectually and logically of really everything. To wheel with spokes. The center is the point from which everything else radiates. And to understand what's on the periphery of the wheel, you first have to understand what's at the hub, what's at the center. And so Watkins' thesis there, in his best-known book, was that if we're to make sense of the modern world and all its problems, we first need to make sense of the Catholic faith and then use that to understand what we see around us. And if we fail to do that, we never will get an authentically accurate understanding of the world. And so the Catholic center is a key thing to understand and to get. So that was his book somewhat in later life. Mm-hmm. He was a convert, by the way, to Catholicism when he was age 20. And he became quasi-active politically around World War I because he was actually publicly opposed to conscription for that war. And he actually wrote a pamphlet later on against conscription. And he later, in the 1930s, between the wars, joined with the Catholic sculptor Eric Gill and with Donald Atwater, whose books we've talked about on the show previously.
Yep.
And they together were part of a Catholic pacifistic movement between the two world wars. It was called POX. And it was also something that in this country was supported by Dorothy Day. So E.I. Watkins, Eric Gill, Donald Atwater, they're part of this movement in Britain to keep out of war. My biographical information about Watkins doesn't say what his opinion was once the war actually came, World War II. I presume, like others who had been trying to keep out of war, and he probably enlisted or what have you. But anyways, so he had that. And most of his books then are about the Catholic faith in some respect. He's got a late one called Poets and Mystics, for example. In 1955, another book of his that I had called Neglected Saints, saints you normally don't hear about, but you ought to know about. And his next to last book was Roman Catholicism in England, from the Reformation to 1950. But let's go back to his very first book, which is the one we're talking about today, and it's from 1915, so 105 years ago. And the title is Some Thoughts on Catholic Apologetics. And the subtitle is A Plea for Interpretation. And that word is important to him. And I'll just read his first couple sentences from the preface, and then I'll let you interject.
Okay,
He says,
sure.
The purpose of the following pages is simple. To non-Catholics, the author would say, do listen to what Catholics have to say for their creed. To Catholics, he would say, do speak so that non-Catholics can and will listen. So that's how he begins the book.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I appreciate the bio. Karl, I have to confess, I don't own any of his books. And so when you mentioned it in your email, let's do this book, I jumped on archive.org, and it's available for free. So I was speed reading it in the meantime just to get up to speed on it. And, it seems like Watkins, his expertise, he's really interested in how apologetics interacts with the world, rather than dogma, theology, even history, at least in this work. And the plea for interpretation, I think, is a good example of that he really wants to focus on the practical, how to get ideas through to the modern mind, at least the modern mind as it was back in 1915.
Yes, and as I'll quote him further as we go along, but the way he characterizes the society of his time could be a characterization used for this, for the society of our time, because we still, as he was, were in a position where, if you were to ask, most people couldn't even tell you what they mean by God. Even believing Christians, if you were to ask, what is God to you? What do you mean? They'd be dumbstruck. They wouldn't know what to say.
Yeah.
So we need to deal with people as they really are. And so in this book, Watkins isn't so much trying to prove the Catholic faith in a logical, syllogistic way.
Mm-hmm.
He isn't listing all kinds of dogmas and then drawing conclusions. He's mainly trying to see how, in his time, or now in our time, we can make the faith intelligible to people who, maybe through no fault of their own, have an unconscious bias against the faith and say very little about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it certainly is applicable. And also, it's interesting that he kind of styled the average audience as something, I guess he would call infidels or people who don't believe in God, that their knowledge is more with secular world view than anything else. And so Catholic dogma is like the moon to them. It's talking gibberish. They don't understand it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And, there was something of a revival of Christianity, both in Catholic and Protestant forms, after World War I. Now, this book comes out in 1915, so the year after the war started. But the war was so traumatic that many people, for the first time in their lives, turned seriously to religion. So there was something of a revival of the faith in the 20s and onward. And in our own country, we see much later, several decades, a kind of revival, especially among Protestants, where beginning in the 20s, but especially going into the 50s and 60s, fundamentalism and then evangelicalism became more pronounced and more active.
Yeah.
And now we've sort of fallen back on both the Catholic and Protestant sides to a less rigorous or active mode of religiosity. And so in a way, we're sort of back to where Watkins was when he wrote this more than a century ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah, you're right. Because after the, at the 80s and 90s, you had that influx of fundamentalism and evangelicalism. And then now we're swimming in the new atheism or just plain apathy. People just don't know the faith. I hear the music coming up. Karl, we are chatting with Karl Keating, founder of Catholic Answers, and we're looking at Catholic classics, specifically E.I. Watkins, some thoughts on Catholic apologetics, a plea for interpretation. So stay tuned. More to come on the other side of the break.
Logan, what has Virgin Most Powerful Radio done for you?
Well, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, I got to say, I've been a listener for about a year now, and it's really helped me grow closer to my faith in the fact that I'm listening and I'm getting unsugar-coated, clear, charity with clarity Catholicism. And it has really helped me even, grow so much deeper in my faith as a young man and discern the priesthood and have a love for Jesus Christ. And this is so seen on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful, the unsugar-coated, clear truth of our Catholic faith that is so lacking today. It's almost like the Terry and Jesse show. It's the orange juice Catholicism. It's filling things up. I just need to give them a shout-out, my praise. I'm just so appreciative. It's just really helped me, and I know people want to hear this. It inspires me to want to speak it, and it inspires me to even go as far as discerning the priesthood to think, I should speak this. We need to stand up for our beautiful faith. This is the unsugar-coated beauty, and this is just what I've seen on the Terry and Jesse show. I encourage so many listeners to start donating and support this cause. It has just really impacted my life, and all I just want to give is some praise to it.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR. and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Karl Keating of a classic apologetic work, which is by E.I. Watkins. It is Some Thoughts on Catholic Apologetics, a plea for interpretation. And so, Karl, I want to thank you in advance because I was unaware of this book, and it's very good. I'm going to have to hunt down his other books as well. And so we talked a little bit about Watkins' background, and it's a very good apologetic work. Why don't we get into the meat of his book about what does he mean for a plea for interpretation?
Yeah. Early on he says, unless the apologist possesses this general view that he's talking about of the intellectual conditions and the spiritual needs of his time, and of the main lines on which Christian apologetics should proceed in view of these special conditions and needs, his more detailed work is most likely to miss its aim. So the first thing is that the apologist needs to understand the situation around him. And it's not necessarily what a beginning apologist or even a more experienced one might imagine. It's easy, and maybe, Gary, you went through this too as you first were getting into apologetics. You get so excited about these discoveries, scriptural, historical, and so on, about how all the parts of the faith fit together. And it's sort of like a giant jigsaw puzzle that finally all the pieces are there, and you can show the puzzle to others. But there's a bit of a danger in that you can be missing communication with others because you're not really sensing where those folks are. So what seems so obvious and exciting to you might completely go over their heads, and they can't make anything of it. So Watkins here says, the need of religion is urging the best in modern society toward the church. And our part is surely not so much controversy with error, but interpretation of our own beliefs. So what does he mean by interpretation? Some might say that sounds a little fuzzy. But he says, by interpretation, as primarily advocated in this essay, I do not mean any modification of the statement of the dogma itself, but a relation of the dogma to the speculations of modern thought, an explanation of its bearing on modern problems, ideas, philosophies, and scientific hypotheses, its use as a standard or rule by which the results of modern thought are to be judged, and the true elements in modern speculation distinguished from the false. So, how do you do apologetics in a society like ours and like his at the time that doesn't seem open to thinking about apologetics? That takes a little finesse. You and I have both been in situations where we've made, in the face of a controversialist or a non-believer, we've made what we think are wonderful arguments on behalf of the church, and we turn around to find that they made no impress at all because perhaps the person had no idea what we meant by the terms, even simple terms to us, like faith and church and infallibility or what have you. Those things were just passed him by, and it's as though we were speaking Ugaritic or something to him. He didn't understand the words, Right. So the essence here is that we always have to take into account, as almost the first factor, what our hearer or reader really understands or doesn't understand. about the topic in question. And unless we get that down, we're not going to make progress.
Yes. Yeah, my experience has always been apologetics is almost like translating a language to a second language, trying to put the faith in a way that's understandable for the other person, speaking, using their terminology, using their theological outlook, in order to make sense of the faith. Was that your experience as well? More like a translator than an arguer?
Often, yes. Now, often, of course, when you're dealing with people who have a substantial intellectual investment into Christianity, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, that's not so much a problem because they've done the homework, they've done the basics, and there are confusions. Our evangelical friends talk about the infallibility of Scripture. That's a misuse of the word. What they mean is the inerrancy of Scripture. There's no error taught in Scripture. Infallibility, though, implies an agent who can make a decision that's not a mistake. So when we talk about papal infallibility or an ecumenical council's infallibility, we mean that the Pope or the bishops united with him are not able in certain circumstances to teach us true what's really false. But that takes an active agent to do that. The Bible isn't itself an active agent. So when we look at it, we can see it has no error in it. So it's inerrant, but it's not infallible because it doesn't itself make a decision. So it's that kind of distinction that I often find myself having to make speaking with people who are devoted Protestants, for example, trying to get terminology clear enough so that we can have a discussion. Because if he talks about Scripture as infallible when what he means is inerrant, then if we get to the point of papal infallibility or something, then there's a real confusion in how to use these terms. It's like doing a math problem where at one point you talk about the unknown quantity x and then the unknown quantity y, and you mix them up. And what do you end up with? Well, you have a confusion.
Yeah, that's a great example, too. And when you clarify things like that, it brings to light other things as well. For example, the reader of Scripture is an agent, and the reader can make mistakes as far as interpreting Scripture. So Scripture may be inerrant, but the reader isn't necessarily infallible, right? You can't can err.
And the reader is not inerrant either.
Yeah.
Not only not infallible, not inerrant.
Yeah.
Because each of us, no matter how well we've studied, have some, at least imprecisions about the faith, and we may have inaccuracies, we may have outright errors, okay?
Yeah.
Even though we're trying to be docile in learning the faith and taking everything in. But the Catholic faith basically covers everything. So it's not like a very simple religion where there aren't many beliefs that are proffered for belief, for acceptance. And, for example, Islam has very few doctrines, very few. Islam is more of an attitude or an approach rather than a listing of things to believe. So we have catechisms, we have theological treatises. There's no true equivalent within Islam, okay? Because it's a religion of very few doctrinal teachings. Catholicism has so many because it's authentically trying to cover everything in the world and in the other world. Okay, so so we need to often engage in a lot of defining before we can have a good discussion with somebody. If we can't do that, I mean, consider in politics the same kind of thing. If you mean by freedom or liberty one thing, and your interlocutor means quite something else, you could be using the same terms, and you end up the discussion no closer to one another in terms of understanding, because you've not been meaning the same things by those terms.
Right.
So in religion, which is a problem in politics, we need to get terms right, and that's part of Watkins' notion of interpretation. Unless we get the terms right and then move forward, we're not going to really move forward.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And you can't assume that the person you're talking to has those linguistic tools, that they know the definitions, they know, the words that you're using. You kind of have to equip them with the instruments so that they can see what you're seeing. If that makes sense.
True even of Catholics. Yeah. I mean, when I was young, and even when you were young, you're younger than I am, but still, when we were kids, we learned the faith, we learned Christianity in a kind of substantial way with, childlike principles that were matured over time. But nowadays, we're surrounded by people who've never had religious instruction, and their religiosity is often not beyond the habitual. And so they have trouble even discussing what the terms mean. I mentioned at the top of the hour, what do you mean by God? You can ask somebody, and the usual response is silence, because the person doesn't really know what he means by God.
Yeah.
And what are the attributes? I was recently online with I forget the exact topic, but ultimately we came to angels and what were the characteristics of angels. And I pointed out that angels are pure spirit, which, among other things, means they don't have bodies. They have no matter in them. Okay? And so when they manifest themselves to us, they're not manifesting themselves in physical bodies like we have, even if that may be the way. It may be that they would show themselves to us in a way that appears to be a body because that's something we can take in with our eyes. But in fact, angels don't have physical bodies. Okay. Mm-hmm. And yet, this discussion I had online seemed to cause a lot of difficulty for people because they weren't able to make distinctions between matter and spirit. I even got to the point where I had to say, things such as energy and the physical universe, those all count as matter philosophically. We don't normally think of electricity as matter, but it is. It's a created thing that's not spirit. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it can be measured in certain ways with our senses, with the tools we make. But the people I was dealing with online had trouble seeing that something like electricity is not spirit, it's not matter in their mind. They didn't know what it was.
Yeah. Great example. We're chatting with Karl Keating, and we're talking about E.I. Watkins' book, some thoughts on Catholic apologetics. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone, and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. And, he's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics, and we're chatting with Karl Keating over the classic apologetic work by E.I. Watkins, which is some thoughts on Catholic apologetics, a plea for interpretation. And by the way, folks, you can get this free at archive.org. Just search for some thoughts on Catholic apologetics, and you, like me, can peruse this book and lots of very cool insights. And Karl, you know, I have to give you kudos because talking about angels, you really do need to define terms and create those tools to understand. Because even the best, I think I remember a story from Frank Sheed, was it, that after describing a miracle before a crowd, somebody yelled back, "That's the best definition of nothing I've ever heard." It's difficult. Yeah.
It is. You know, your nothing reminds me of something that, it might have been Richard Dawkins or one of the other recent modern well-known atheists mentioned about the origin of everything, and he's talking in terms of belief in creation. But what he meant by creation was the development of things, the evolution of things from a primordial soup or kind of plasmatic state, okay, where there was not yet any planet, any star, any formed minerals or rocks or anything, just this kind of soup. And he says, you know, so we believe in creation, and yet that's not really what creation means. Creation means the bringing out of something from nothing. So even a primordial soup or plasmatic condition of, you know, sort of almost pre-matter, that's still material stuff. It's not nothing. It's something, okay? Right. Where what God has done is he brings things out of zero, out of the absence of everything, which is nothing, no thing. So you've got even a very intelligent man, such as whether it was Dawkins or somebody else recently, who simply doesn't understand the basic meaning of the word creation. And because he misconstrues it, he then draws all kinds of false inferences from his understanding of what the word means. Okay? Yes. There's a very telling passage that I came across during the break here in Watkins' book. And it's a passage that somebody could write today because it really does apply equally well today. And you have to think, this is a guy writing 105 years ago. So it's one of those examples of the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right.
He said, in an age, listen to this one, in an age, aren't we in an age of rush? In an age of rush, of dissipation and of comfort, hard thinking is as distasteful as plain living. It is so much easier and more pleasant to adopt some well-sounding catchword or to follow some vague feeling than to think exactly and to express one's thoughts clearly, which must always be difficult and laborious. Moreover, this intellectual vice is obviously the special vice of the half-educated. Our age, however, with its popular education, its cheap printing, and its countless magazines and newspapers, is preeminently the epoch of the half-educated. Well, if that was true in 1915, where we no longer, of course, have really much by way of newspapers or magazines, people go online for little sound bites. If people were half-educated in his time, what proportion are they educated today? I don't think we could really argue that it's a higher proportion. You know, T.S. Eliot famously said, where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? We're swamped with information online, which is where most people get most of their information, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're swamped with information. How much of that ends up being actual knowledge about something? And then how much of that knowledge, however little there may be, ends up as wisdom? It's pretty discouraging when you think about it. And here, Watkins, 105 years ago, is really talking about our own time. Well, of course, he didn't know that. And in the middle of it, by the way, I'd like to point out he uses the word catchword. You could say slogan today, but catchword. It reminds me of something, a phrase from the novelist Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island and the like. Stevenson said, man does not primarily by bread, but by catchwords. So taking a little different turn on the biblical phrase. Modern man does not live primarily on bread, but by catchwords or slogans. And that's really the kind of public that we have to deal with as apologists. People think in terms of handy little slogans or catchwords. And we've got to somehow get past that, because the use of catchwords or slogans, and you see this all the time online, is to shut down discussions or dissensions by coming out with a little quip as though that solves or answers things. And, of course, it doesn't. But it's an excuse for people not to do the hard thinking, not to do the study that's needed on whatever the topic may be. But it's a way to get around having to do that by having this little quip or catchword, which closes down things. And you think you've won, but in fact you haven't won. You've lost because you haven't bothered to do the work to find out how things really are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're like verbal landmines that if you step on them, the discussion's over. Cliche thinking, that type of stuff, that's all around us today.
It is. And even within the church, as we're talking, you can go to Catholic websites or Facebook pages or what have you, and you find a lot of this kind of thing too. I mean, it's sort of a methodology taken from online experiences in other areas, where it's the catchword or the slogan that seems to put an end to a discussion. Well, it does put an end to a discussion, but not in the sense of giving you a solution. It just makes it a dead end rather than a useful end. And we Catholics need to get away from that, because society is rapidly getting to a position where there's a kind of nonsensicalness or illogic about almost everything that's going on. And we need to use the word from Watkins' later book from 1939. We need to understand the Catholic center. We need to be centered in the Catholic faith, in Catholic philosophy and Catholic theology, to the extent that, any of us is in a position to do that. But we need to do this to make sense of what's going on around us for ourselves, and then to make sense by transference for other people. Because we live in a world where most people mentally are lost. And we need to acknowledge that and work with that world as it is.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things Watkins recommends in the book is the use of analogies, drawing analogies from the theological world and applying it to something that they would experience in the secular world as a means of communicating.
Yes. I mean, analogy only can go so far, of course, but in the kind of world that we have, what he calls half-educated, maybe now a quarter-educated, an analogy is a good way to bring someone step by step toward a more syllogistic understanding of things. So analogies are very powerful tools in the art of rhetoric, and I'm using that in the old Greek sense of reasoned discussion of differences. But how do you get to people to the point where they can actually be talking reasonably, that is, with reason, about differences, and to the point where they can become persuaded that maybe they need to adopt some other understandings or beliefs? Well, you can't usually do that straight off. You need to bring them closer, and the use of analogies is a very good way to do that.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it would still be applicable today. I know for me, I found that, for example, if you have an issue like abortion that's very motion-based, lots of cliches, that type of thing, of doing an analogy with slavery, which it's pretty cut and dry, and most people don't have, strong sentiments, for slavery. That if you could draw the parallelism between abortion and slavery, that you kind of teach them by analogy that, abortion is essentially the same thing and therefore immoral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that works not just for moral issues, but you can also use it, issues. Frank Sheed often would mention that when he was in Hyde Park in London, talking from what they call the pitches on the weekend, as elevated stands to passing crowds, that he would use analogies to first get the crowd's attention so they'd stop and listen to him, and then to move point by point from analogy in everyday life, a non-religious topic perhaps, but bringing it over towards the faith. And he found a lot of success with that, and that was in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And although we don't speak in public parks that same way anymore, we can still use analogies to bring people toward a position where they begin to see that maybe the Catholic faith has something to say for itself beyond what they imagine. And this, again, applies both to Catholics and non-Catholics. Because Catholics, even those who go to church on Sunday, don't really know much about their faith and think it's a pretty thin gruel. And, they're there more for social reasons or what have you, more for those things perhaps than for the doctrines of the faith and, the teachings that all fit together so well and so beautifully that you and I and others can appreciate, but they just don't, get that sense perhaps. It hasn't been, it's almost like a blind person who's never seen wildflowers in the fields before, how beautiful they can be. And we need to get them to the point where they're open to discussing things that have been beyond their experience or their understanding. And again, an analogy is one way to do that.
Yeah, very good. And another way is to give good Catholic resources like the books you've written. Karl, it's unbelievable, but the hour is already flown. We're coming up on the end. But before we go, I want you to tell people where they can go to get a hold of all your books and writings and so on.
Well, go to Amazon.com and you can get, you see all my books, and a number of them are available as audiobooks, so you can check there.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you, Karl. Truly appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
I look forward to another one, Gary.
All right. That's Karl Keating, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, go on Amazon.com, type in Karl Keating. He has a number of fantastic books. I recommend them and share them with friends. Well, the hour is gone, but coming up next, we have the Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholic Talk, coming at you. God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow. Do this thing we call Hands-On Apologetics. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.